Synopsis, a series of conversations on compositional practice. Today, Yuhan Ng is presenting. So, Yuhan, I kindly ask you to begin with a short presentation, also with where and how your musical and compositional formation took place.
Yeah. Oh, hello. And I'm very grateful for this opportunity to discuss my music. It's a pleasure on my end. So my compositional journey, I actually started composing quite late in life, about the age of 19 or 20. So I didn't do A-level music and all that. I went to university to start composition at King's College London in the UK. And it was, at the time, it was more like a general music degree rather than a specific compositional course. But it was also during that period where I started getting very interested in writing contemporary music. And after that, I went to the Royal Academy of Music in London again to further pursue my compositional studies. Yeah, and after I graduated, I started working as a teacher and also as a freelance composer, and that's where I am at the current moment.
Did you study anything else specifically as well? But music before that? What was your path looking like before or at that point like?
Yeah, that's you mean just before my studies, right? Actually, I didn't do music. I didn't study music at A levels, but I was actually a pianist, and I still am. I'm teaching piano right now, but I was just doing up to my diploma for piano, and initially I didn't think of studying music at all. I was thinking I want to go into academia for humanities rather than music. And I think around the time just before I entered university back in Singapore, I thought, actually, I've loved doing music for most of my life, and why am I not thinking of turning that into a career? So it was a very sudden shift right there. And I think I sort of caught everyone by surprise around me. They were just like, oh, wait, aren't you going to study something else? But so that was why I came to the UK to do music, and I've been here ever since.
Does the interest in humanities still form a part of your studies next to composition or inside composition, actually?
Yes, actually, that's a really good question because it does. I'm actually very interested in things like history and this idea of tradition, and that informs the way I write my music. So a lot of the pieces I write have elements of the past. So you have Gregorian chants, you have fragments of Renaissance music, and a lot of it is bringing the past into the present and making the past alive in this present. I guess my view is that there's always some kind of inheritance from the past, and it's important to remember that and not let go of what has come before. And it's not so much taking that tradition and making it very static, it's not taking something in the past and saying, here it is. It's not a museum. So a lot of it is using the past to sort of reshape what you have inherited so that it speaks to what we have right now, to the current situation that we face, if that makes sense.
Yes, certainly. And my consideration here is that anyway, there's, I guess, what you're addressing partially is working with the life part of the past, working with the aspect that does not, because maybe it was never static. It could never be static. What you work with, compose with, in this sense, and since it is this aspect that you also point out in the very preface to your cello sonata, and my suggestion is to also work with concrete examples, concrete compositions of yours. May we continue with your cello sonata? Later on, I wish to also make an overview over how you approach composition and how you compose. But if we start with a specific example, how would you introduce it to a viewer and to a listener?
How would I introduce one of my pieces? And I mean, what you just mentioned, the cello sonata right there, I think that piece is very close to my heart because it started off with, as a solo cello, it's sort of a solo instrument composition, isn't it? So there's this feeling that, I can just finish it very quickly, but it ended up taking quite a long time, and that was, in terms of duration, it's one of my longest pieces. By far, it's almost 25 minutes long, I think. Yeah. And actually, how would I introduce such a work to someone who might not have listened to contemporary music before? And I think we can talk about the kind of dynamics of that later. But in this particular case, if you look at my sonata, there are sort of interludes between the movements. So traditional sonatas have movement 1, movement 2, movement 3, but in between them there are 2 interludes, and they both have elements of what I mentioned. There was actually a Gregorian chant between the first and second movement, and between the second and third movement there's a Ukrainian hymn right there. And these 2 elements actually are perhaps the ones that those who have never listened to contemporary music before, but they are familiar with maybe the music of the Catholic Church, or if they are familiar with traditional hymns, that would have been familiar, and that's something to latch onto. And the materials of the movements, to some extent, are drawn from those interludes. So it's not like a traditional sonata where you have, the first movement, then you have exposition, development, and all that. But here is where the interludes are actually where the materials sort of dissipate into the rest of the movement.
Familiarity. Why is this something to latch on, in your words? Why do you, as a composer, care about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And actually, I have been thinking about this recently as well. Contemporary music, one of the struggles I personally faced, and it was not something that I was very aware of right at the start, but one of the struggles I faced is how my aesthetic standards are so different from maybe a lay listener of music. I may look at a score and I might think, okay, there are these amazing structural features, there are these very novel kind of sounds, very unique sound worlds that are being created. But someone who's new to such music, they might want to hear a sort of narrative, a sort of teleology right there. Tonality is actually so important in most musical traditions, while contemporary music has a sort of a trophy of tonality, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a language all of its own, and it's very unique. It's very well developed, but there's often a sort of accessibility gap right there. And what I'm trying to do is to bridge these two worlds together, where you have the more tonal elements and you have those that sort of transcend that. But at the same time, I don't want it to be so abstract. I want to bring it to people as well. That makes sense.
Yeah, certainly. It does. I did thought of that when listening, how the range of cello and the singing, quote unquote, of the cello and full range of sound that you bring to the performance through composition is very gratifying, just from that physical aspect of sound.
Oh, thank you.
But to continue with this composition, why? Because why was the start, the goal at the beginning of composing, to write a non-programmatic composition? I wondered, because yes, okay, you said then the time in which it was composed influenced how it developed and where you took it. Why was that a goal at all, if I may ask?
Yeah. Oh, that's actually a really, really good question. Because since the 19th century, we have this distinction, right, between programmatic music and absolute music. So we have something that's based on a program, something that's a bit maybe more abstract in terms of absolute music. It is more music for itself. My personal take is that we composers might distinguish that way, but a listener very likely will never do that. There'll always be some associations he or she has when they listen to a work of absolute music. And it's just because of our life experiences where we draw so much imagery from various places, and all of those imagery influence the story of that piece. So composers might split the two. Listeners will very likely collapse them into program music. Yeah. I do that sometimes when I listen to. Yeah, I mean even like even Stockhausen sometimes, like it's so abstract, some of his pieces, but there's a certain angularity to the architecture of the music, and it sometimes reminds me of some kind of museum, some kind of a building. So to me there is something there to visualize beyond the music, or rather the music sort of feeds into that picture. And I'm not sure how others might listen to Stockhausen, but everyone creates a new program out of it. Yeah.
I must say I've noticed that myself.
Yeah.
And that, hence, for the laughters. Well, not, how do you maintain the perspective? Is it important to you to keep in perspective? I'm guessing it's important to you to keep in perspective the listener very much when composing. Is this one of the key aspects, or if we are already jumping from the specific composition to the overview of what is important to you when composing? Is this one of the aspects that are key?
Yeah, I used to care a lot, maybe a couple of years back, but over the years I sort of give the program to the listeners. Actually, I start not by giving it to the listeners. I sort of give it to the performers first, because a lot of my pieces in maybe the past year or two, they give a lot of freedom to the performers, and the performers will perform it in a way that's different. Everyone who plays the same piece will do it differently, and the various listeners will feel it differently as well. But that doesn't mean that it's sort of a free for all. There are of course certain sounds I desire, and there are those that I don't really want. But what I feel is most important is that the audience that listens to it resonates in some way with the piece. So to me, that's very important. It's a very listener-centric way of composing, and I've only done it more recently, I have to say, because in the past I was very focused on, remember what we were talking about at the start, which is the technicality of contemporary music and accessibility. Because what I realize is that when the music is not accessible, it also means that the listeners can't resonate with the structure of the music. And across the history of music, this is quite unprecedented, right? Where I mean, even musical traditions I've never heard of, that or don't really hear very frequently. Like for example, say Japanese gagaku music. It might be very new to me, but I can still resonate. I can still see that context there. The way the music is the music of the Japanese court in the past, and all the rituals and the steadiness, the stateliness of the musical sound that was created, and even that unfamiliarity, I can still feel it, right? But I found that contemporary music, and just my personal views, that it's further removed than that. It's reached a certain degree where it's quite far from the listeners, to the point where there's this composition book I've read a couple of years back called The Restless Noise, and although that wasn't the meaning, but sometimes, at least from my experience talking to listeners, they do feel it's like walking through a like contemporary art gallery. And how do they feel about that? And how do I want to interact with them such that I, as a composer, am communicating with them rather than showing them something that's quite arcane in a way.
Right. And that does resonate with me as
Yeah.
well, to hear an unknown traditional or historic, in a sense, let's say in a sense older than 100 years music. It's true, usually one wouldn't notice what one notices in you've mentioned atrophy of tonality, right? In connection to contemporary music. And at that point also a question arose for me. Is it also that much, is it also a bit of an assumption that this needs to happen, that so much of it is happening indeed? Is it but now I'm speculating and generalizing. Just as a thought, if you wish to comment. Otherwise,
Oh yeah. And I guess what you're asking is it necessary to um, to sort of sit with people and let people let the audience make sort of, is it necessary for it to be accessible? Is that what you're asking?
also, or as well, if it is perhaps that it seems like it is decided that it has to be atonal,
Yeah.
while it can be I mean, who said it has to be anything?
Yeah, yeah,
And if we're speaking about who said if it has to be anything, it comes to another consideration, which I
yeah,
want to
yeah.
hear.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question because I actually feel that there's a difference between complexity and being profound. And there are complex works which are profound as well. And there are profound works which are quite simple. But there are also complex works which are not profound. And she's actually a literary critique in America. And I can't remember her name. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right. Cien Nai. I think she's from Burma, and she wrote this book called Sublimity, which is the sublime and so-called stupid joined together. But what she meant is not stupidity. What she meant is there's something overwhelming. There's something very complex. But it's not profound in the sense that it sort of shakes up your whole emotions when you look at it or when you feel it. But rather it sort of makes you tired. And she's actually talking about the modern age where there's just so much information coming at you. Like let's say I think TikTok is a very good example, right? And Facebook and all the social media. It sort of feeds you a lot of things. It's very complex. It's full of things, but it tires you. And when I listen to contemporary music, the way I judge personally whether it's a good or bad work according to my own feelings, it's when the work is it profound as well, or is it just complex? And I realize creating a profound work, whether simple or complex, that's actually very difficult. That's actually very tricky. Like I love George Benjamin's operas. His music is so carefully crafted. The way the lines move, it's amazing. And I would say that's profound music. But not every contemporary work is profound, including quite a lot of my own, if I may self-critique. Yeah.
Well, in this era, in this period,
Yeah.
how do you orientate yourself as a composer?
Yeah. Like how do I navigate the
Navigate,
times of it?
and as well as what do you consider as context that is important for you?
Yeah. That's a really good question. So, um, I think for me, a sense of rest is important because what I see is that we live in a post-truth world, if that makes sense. Like you have something in the center that maybe everyone can see, but there are such divergent ways of looking at it, and it's a world that's very divided. And I actually feel like sometimes it's not about who's right or who's wrong. Sometimes I think people needs a space to rest and to sit with, not have so much information barraging into your headspace. And I don't think we are evolved for that. For most of human history, what we know is sort of our community, our sort of our tribe, you could say, or maybe our city, our village. And there isn't this sense that it's overwhelming, yet banal, right? What I mentioned before. Yeah. And so for me, what's important, the way I write music right now, is creating a sense of rest, creating a sense of listening. I want listeners, the audience, to really stretch their ears to listen. Um, Most of my pieces, if you look at the score, apart from the last movement of the cello sonata, but the rest of my pieces, they're all quite quiet. In fact, I think MF is the loudest dynamic right there. And what I want people to do is really just sit there and open their ears to listen. And there are times where in my music I create very large gaps of rests. And I want the audience to just sit there and, oh, the music has stopped, but based on how they see the performers, there's something that's going to come again. And it's always very gentle. And it's also not intrusive. It doesn't force the listeners to feel like, I must listen to this. It's okay if performers sort of tune out while listening to my music, because I think sometimes we need to do that. And it's okay. Maybe the concert hall is a sanctuary. It's a bit like it's like a church or a temple, and you can rest there. That's how I would orient my music.
Beautiful. And to continue with the overview, what else would you say is an important aspect, an effector in the process, in the way you compose?
Yeah. You mean like sources of inspiration? Is that?
For example?
Yeah. That's I think the quotations or the sort of fragments in my music, they kind of give clues. So for example, I think my most recent piece is for Baroque harpsichord. Baroque violin and harpsichord. Harpsichord is a Baroque instrument. So these two. And
what is the name of the piece? What is the name?
Oh yeah, I can share it with you. Let me find it.
Oh, just the name, so that everyone has a reference if there's a wish to go to listen to it. What?
Yeah. So it's called the loom. So it's like the clothes machine where you create cloth. It's not released yet in terms of the recording. It'll take a couple more months, but I'd love to share it when it's ready. The way I wrote that piece is it's actually a quotation from a French Baroque harpsichord composer called Royer, and I took the main melody and I intended to do this like theme and variations, but I ended up doing the reverse. I started with the variations first before going to the theme. So it's quite unclear at the start what it is before the materials start to coalesce. And there are a lot of gaps in the music. There are a lot of pauses there. And it's almost like you have these little flashes of light, and then it goes dark again. Little flashes of light. And the whole point is so that listeners don't feel like they have to follow the story, but the story is forming, right? And they're looking out at a pond late at night, and there's maybe a few fireflies that eventually form into a shape they can recognize.
So in this way, you were addressing the inspiration, right? Just to take us back to it. How exactly? To restate?
Oh yes, yeah. Well, I will. Yeah. So I think it's back to what I mentioned about bringing something from the past. Like there's a certain tradition there, and what I mentioned about the world being so fragmented and unsettled, I think sometimes reminding of where you're grounded in, a sense of identity, right? So for music, I often quote like the Baroque period, the Renaissance period, because there's a sense of where the classical tradition comes from, right? We do contemporary music, and we always think that's very new. We are pushing boundaries. But to me, you can only push boundaries when you have a sense of inheritance from the past, right? You are sort of you are a point in the line rather than creating something entirely new. You're always drinking from an ancient stream or several ancient streams, and it's keeping people grounded there. For me, I chose materials that resonate a bit more with me personally. So a lot of a lot of music that originated from the church. So, for example, the cello sonata has the hymns. If you look at, say, the canonical hours, that piece has elements of Thomas Victorius' O Magnum Mysterium. It's a very famous piece from the Renaissance that I sang in choir when I was younger. And a lot of that is bringing familiarity from the past to the present, so that people feel a sense of groundedness, even though you are moving ahead, if that makes sense.
Certainly. Why do you not mention singing in a choir as part of your musical formation?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think there were quite a few. Choir was it was a big part of my life when I was younger. It was in school and also in church as well. So there was a lot of choral music all about me, and I think that sense of how choral music influenced the kind of musical writing I have. It's that sense of counterpoint, which to me is very grounded and very unique to the classical tradition. I mean, if you look at other world musical tradition, there are other examples of counterpoint, but the very specific way in which the sort of Western harmony arose came from the contrapuntal tradition that was largely developed in the church over the last 500 to 1,000 years back. It started with those plain chants before you have organum, and then you have the very rich, complex polytonal works during the Renaissance. Yeah, so it's really the entire stream of thought that really mattered to me, and how I want to keep grounded within that, rather than thinking of myself as pushing boundaries but not looking back. If that, I know we have been circling around this, but that's sort of the whole worldview of music by which I operate in.
Yeah, developed and preserved, right, by the church in the library.
I think that the word I would use is it's a living tradition. So it's tradition, but it's alive, and because it's alive, the tradition changes as well.
Right. To more technical aspects of the composition process of yours, since we were just at the institution that also, in my awareness, drove the development of notation system as we know it today. Notation on its own, but also since now we were speaking ideas, context, outlook, conceptualization of composition. What about the technical aspects and how they tie into what was said up until now? Starting with the very basic melodies, harmony, structure, form. How do you consider those elements in your practice?
Yeah. I find it hard to answer, if I'm honest, because so much have shifted over the last 5 years of writing music. 5 years, I say 5 because that was the time when I graduated from after my master's degree, and it was about 5 years where I was just composing freelance and just finding ensembles, working with musicians in London, in Europe, in Asia, and a lot has changed since I started. But if I sort of put the timeline right, so right at the start, I was very interested in non-teleological forms. So composers like Bryn Harrison, he's a composer in the UK, and his music has this sense that it's like a sculpture that you observe from different angles. So it's like the same, but yet the textures are so different when you view it at different angles. And it's a bit like the ocean, isn't it? Like the ocean is kind of there. It doesn't change shape suddenly, but the waves are all different. So it's the surface elements that keep on changing, while the underlying structure is the same. Um, and I was very keen on writing that kind of music. Like one of my pieces, near Stasis, is based on that. So this idea that music is something you immerse in, you swim inside it. It's not like a story, right? And but as sort of like in recent years, I've become increasingly interested in creating a narrative out of that. Like what I mentioned about the loom, where it's a reverse theme and variations, and you have these materials that start off quite random even, but they coalesce and they form a shape we recognize. It's actually a Baroque harpsichord piece, and you start realizing that around the middle of the piece, where the fragments get bigger and bigger, and oh wait, this is a part of. It sounds almost like Mozart, but not quite. Yeah, and for me, having that sense of the music is quite important. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question there. Yeah.
You answer as you answer.
Yeah.
What I noticed with the canonical works was
Yeah.
also that it sounded as if there's two almost independent uh, compositions happening at the same time. Uh, then then I read the notes and it started making sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually like I mean, it's like two different textures, right? One of it is like almost like Takamitsu, and it's very sparse sound world. But then you have this like medieval sound that goes through it, and I think that was the intention there. There's a story developing, but they're also quite separate sound worlds.
Very.
And again, it's drinking from the past to inform the present. You have two different textures that come from different time periods, and yet they sort of sit with each other as well.
Right. Um, so now a lot have been said to connectivity between the past and the present. What about the future? What's, if anything, what do you consider of the future in terms of your compositional work? It can be in general. Um, where do you want to, where do you see your, let's say, opus or thought behind developing? What do you want to achieve, for example?
Yeah, that's a question I've personally felt a lot recently, and I there is a composer called Brian Ferneyhoo, and he actually mentioned something in a very insightful point with in his interview with Samuel Andreev, and he said that there's a lot of composers now. There's like an explosion of composers, right? And just to give context, like I come from Singapore, so if you go back 2 generations, so maybe 60 or 70 years back, there's maybe 5 classical composers. Um, then by the generation just above me, there's maybe 10.
Wow.
If I were to count the numbers of composers right now of my generation, it's like 100, and it's this exponential increase. And Ferneyhoo's point was that is this a good thing necessarily, where there's suddenly so many composers? And I think if you view it from a purely economic perspective, it seems like, well, that's good. There's more music being written. But to me, the supply has to meet the demand. And it seems to me that the reverse has happened, right? during Fernie Hu's time, when he was young, maybe when he was 30, maybe several decades back, actually it's possible to be a contemporary classical composer working independently, working with ensembles and all that. But right now, most of us tend towards terminal degrees, right? We want to do a PhD. And I think that's precisely what's happening, where composers become teachers of other composers, and these composers become teachers of other composers. And that's why there is an increase in the number of composers. It's not actually because the demand has increased. We are not responding to market forces, if that makes sense. And I know this might sound a bit abstract or big picture, but it does influence my own decisions for writing music.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because previously I had the same thought, I want to do a PhD, I want to teach composition, and I like teaching. I love writing music too, so I thought this is perfect. But I realized that it might hit a point where the music becomes institutionalized. Mm-hmm. Right? It's really music of the arts councils, it's music of the university, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's no longer diverse in terms of its institutions. And I think a healthy contemporary classical scene is one where it's found in many contexts rather than just 2 or 3 contexts. Mm-hmm. And which is why I in terms of how I would navigate writing music, I actually want to write contemporary classical music that reaches community, people that are close to me. If that makes sense. Yeah, so I know you didn't mention it, but it's also who do I think of as my audiences, and I've been observing the different festivals and different students who write, like those who attended the festivals, whether they're students or older composers, and they usually write one of 2 kinds of pieces. So in terms of their program, so the first kind is when they write about their own experiences. Mm-hmm. And the second kind is when they talk about something quite abstract, something that's affecting the world. So for example, is writing about maybe war in the world and talking about peace, which is perfect, all these things. But what I realize is that it actually becomes 2 extremes, right? One is really inside. It's inside you, and you want to share with others. The other one is several thousand miles at the other side of the world. And I realized something was missing, which is right in the middle, which is the community just beside you, right? Like, for example, what about the church? Maybe just 500 meters from your house. What about your neighbors? And it's thinking of contemporary music in terms of community. And I actually felt the same way while I was at Lake Bled, where I thought this is amazing because it's situated right in this beautiful, like a town, like a village. Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking, this is great. If we could play at the church there, we could play at the castle, and that's very communal, right? And I think I want to do music like that, which is not really a done thing everywhere. A lot of festivals, or a lot of the audiences are quite specific. Mm-hmm. in these institutional performances. But what I hope for is that people, like really ordinary people, can just come to listen, like in the church, for example, or in the community center. There is actually a composer at the Bled Festival who mentioned something like that. She writes music for children. She writes music for old folks at the old folks' home, and it's not simple music. It's not something that isn't contemporary. She writes quite contemporary music. In fact, she blended like the Croatian folk traditions with contemporary rhythms, and I thought this can relate to people, and at the same time it's complex and profound, and I thought that's beautiful.
And what I observe is also that perhaps corresponding to the increase in the amount of studied composers and the I will
Yeah.
use your words again, the atrophy of tonality.
Yeah.
Perhaps
Yeah.
corresponding to that is also the um, fall of comers to concerts. There's not many people that want to listen to. I'm now speaking more generally, and with
Yeah.
experience from many concerts of contemporary music I've performed at or listened to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so it's perhaps a double factor for losing the at least well, I guess if one is presuming that one composes music to be listened to, which is not, of
Yeah.
course, necessary,
Yeah.
and we know examples that actually didn't want that, but if one presumes that, then we are, yeah, losing one of the essential, as composers, essential parts of the whole music
Yeah. Yeah.
universe, which is the listener.
Mm.
Do you think, because you are not the first that is
Mm.
stressing, first composer that is stressing community, do
Yeah.
you think perhaps this is the way of, in a sense, perhaps a bit brutally, looking for demand? Also, not to keep it that crude, I would say, when, especially, let's say, with contemporary classical music, sometimes it also takes to hear one composition multiple times. I would say, actually, that would be mostly the case, as well as multiple compositions from the same author, from the same composer, um, which is not self-evident that one of the listeners in the concert will actually already know 8 of your pieces, right?
Yeah. 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 I mean, what you mentioned is, I mean, that resonates a lot with me. Um, I know I'm not the only one who, yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's so many people who mention, the sort of the audience, the matter of the audience, and of course, different composers have different answers. Um, Actually, my view is not that it's not so much that it's difficult music, right? Milton Babbitt, and there's this idea of the composer as the specialist, and I don't actually think that is the problem. I actually think the issue is more that the times have changed in terms of people's habit and what they want. Right, in the 1950s, my sensing is that the reason why the avant-garde it flourishes, right? Why is there John Cage? Why is there Philip Glass? Why is there, I know they're very different composers, but why are there all these great figures in the 1950s? And I also feel like part of it is this sense of post-war optimism, right? The war is over, right? And although there was the Cold War hanging there, but there was a sense of optimism that there's something moving forward. And there's this sense that music, there's a lot to explore. There's a lot of sounds that we haven't heard before. We are connected to other parts of the world. We can now see Japan, we can now see South America, and they're increasingly closer. So the new sounds are very exciting. It's a bit like an explorer to like a remote jungle in the 19th century. We wouldn't feel the same excitement today, like, oh, I go into a jungle right now. A lot of it is documented already. So there's this sense that the space of exploration has stagnated. Well, at the time, in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, there's this sense that there's still a lot to see.
Right.
But for us right now, and I've spoken to performers about this, where they come and tell me that, oh, actually this technique by this new young composer, we have done this technique like 15 times already, but like he thinks it's new. He's so excited about it. Yeah, so it's one of those things where the performers actually realize that we are reusing things that we think are very new, but actually they aren't new anymore. And so it seems like, where are we progressing with this exploration? Yeah, so I think part of new music or contemporary classical music, it's not very new anymore sometimes. And even when we find new sounds, it's getting increasingly niche. It's like it's like you go to a desert and you could subdivide the desert into various biomes, and you can subdivide those biomes even further. But I think we are covering more ground in increasingly smaller spaces. If that makes sense. Yeah, and I think that's one reason. The second reason is that people's attention span are much shorter than in the past. You can perform symphonies just several decades back, and you would have full audiences there. And I mean, Shostakovich is a very good example. Like he would have thundering applauses in his concerts. But even if we have a composer like Shostakovich, even with composers like like Debussy, or what's happening today is that we just don't have the head space to listen to it anymore. We don't have head space to listen to such a masterpiece, such an epic. And it's the same with films as well. Like I'm not sure if you've seen any recent films, but what I've noticed personally is that they are so fast paced. They're so quick, shifting between the scenes. And even compared to 15 years ago, movies are much slower. I mean, a very good example is you probably have seen this, like The Godfather, for example. It's a classic, film classic. It's slow. It's very slow paced. But because of that, you can see that character just developing very slowly. But it's beautiful. The way it develops is so natural. While films in recent years feel like, if they aren't exciting you in a maximum level at every moment, then it's not a good film. And if that's our attention span, then contemporary classical music, which demands so much listening, is going to struggle in today and in the coming years.
Well, in my view, you could also draw another parallel between today's films and music, which is, there are those that are perhaps only, and those have been around also for as long as technology, but nevertheless, there are those films that are on perhaps a lot about the technology itself with which they are made of. And paralleling with the techniques that you're mentioning are being slowly exhausted and repeated ad nauseum. And then there are also contemporary films that make use of the technology, perhaps not as much as some other, yet actually very simple use, very, very standard in a sense. Perhaps perhaps working more with the dialogue or with the camera work. So I would draw that parallel there as well. It's all available, but what we choose as composers to work with and how in the end impacts the result, composition, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do feel that's a really good point. I mean, I don't mean to sound gloomy, by the way.
I hope I don't.
I feel like there's a lot of ways there's many ways to sort of move ahead for us.
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned community, right? Um, Another thing is also this sense that actually seeing what people need in this time. And I don't mean demand and supply. It's not commercial music, but there is a finding people's needs. I
Mhm.
think and meeting those needs are important, which is which is why I mentioned about music being a sanctuary, music being a place where you can rest, where the world is so messy and there's so much information coming in. There's this sense of tiredness, and it's very busy. People are getting busier these days, and I think sometimes people just need a break. And why can't contemporary music be something like that? And I don't mean the kind of like lo-fi music, like you go on YouTube and you have this lo-fi music, which is very nice. I like it too, but I don't mean that. Yeah, yeah. I mean something like you really go to it's almost like a sacred space, right? Is this very special? When you go into that room, you just know this is special, and it's not something you can just play on your computer. You need the space,
So,
right? And it goes to maybe the next. Sorry, I'm just going ahead, but um, like there's certain buildings where when you do music in there, it's special.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's recreating those sort of experiences where it's not just the music being played, but the choice of buildings, the choice of environments. Yeah, like I thought Lake Bled was quite magical when music was performed there.
Yeah.
Um, and I felt,
You mean the
you know,
church in Bled?
yeah, I thought the whole environment
The
was
whole, yeah,
magical.
yeah,
If that makes sense. Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. It's I know it's touristy as well, but actually I felt that it preserved this magic. That's what I loved about it, because I have been to many touristy places. They say, oh, this is so amazing, but there's so many people there. But Lake Bled wasn't like that. I felt that the number of people were really just right, and the just seeing the church in the distance and knowing that there's music being performed around, that's very special to me. Yeah, and you can't play that on the computer. You can't listen to that on the headphones. It's creating an experience for people. So I know this sounds like Disneyland, an experience for people, but I think what I meant is contemporary classical music actually can be that sanctuary, and not just in the listening sense, but it's really that whole total experience there. Yeah, I think people need that.
Johan, at this
Yeah,
point,
yeah,
we will be concluding. So,
yeah,
uh, I believe it's a great point to also do that. So, before we do that, actually, with what I wish to conclude is two messages for which I always ask my guests here. And those are one for anyone that is an aspiring composer to be, that is, regardless of the fact that you are as well a composer in development. Um, and the second message for anyone that will listen to your music, hearing this conversation, in case there's a message that you have not yet conveyed.
yeah. Oh, that's these are two good questions, especially the first one. It takes a bit of prep, yeah. But
Sorry.
yeah, no, yeah, yeah. No, I actually get asked that question quite a bit, and I realize the answer is always a little different every time for young composers. And my personal take is that if I wouldn't say I don't want to give advice to composers, because um, I don't think I'm in that state of mind to give advices to them. But what I want to say is, I'll encourage them to always write music, and even when you're not even when you're not able to compose, that's okay. You don't need to compose at every moment in your life. There's some times you need to take a break, and that's okay. Yeah, don't treat it as a career where it's oh wait, this sounds like advice, but yeah, yeah. Don't treat it as something you need to fill up your CV with. that makes sense. Like, I think I did that for the last 5 years. Just I did all these performances. Oh, now I have like 80 in my CV, and I feel good. But actually, the thing is, I've done that, and believe me, the CV is not very meaningful. Actually, what's meaningful is that your music resonates with people, and that people hear that they gain something going back. It doesn't have to be, oh, it's a nice piece. It doesn't have to be that. It can be, this is profound. This hits my heart. This resonates with me. I think that's more important. So I would say write good music. If you need to take a break, take a break, and don't need to fill up your CV. It's not a rat race, although it looks like that sometimes. Yeah. Sorry. What was the second
For the
question?
listener.
Yeah. For listeners of my music, I would say that's a good question too, because it usually depends on the piece, right? But I would say that I write music for people who feel they need a rest, a break, and I would encourage listeners to enter that space, and it is an invitation to the space rather than, oh, you need to listen to my great piece of work. it's I want it to be an invitation, not something demand. And it's okay if you want to sleep through my concerts. It's okay if you're tired. In fact, one of my Irish composer friends, I'm not sure how true this is, so don't take my word for it, but she told me, that was 2 years back, and she mentioned that there are times in Irish culture, and don't take my word for it, but she told me that in Irish culture, if certain kinds of music, when it's played, and if people fall asleep, it's actually okay. In fact, it's seen as a good thing. It means you feel safe. You're in a safe space. And I think approach my music like that. If you want to close it halfway through, that's okay. But it'll be great if you could attend the concerts, because it's no longer just the music, it's also the space.
Johan, thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. It was very